I want to share a video with you from Dr. Thomas Sowell on the effects black culture has had on progress within the black community. Here we go.
This is all very disconcerting, Tom, you know. Cosmic justice, intellectuals and race, quote, no individual or group can be blamed for being born into circumstances that lack advantages. But neither can society be automatically assumed to be either the cause or the cure for such disparities.
Yeah.
Close quote. So what you're arguing is that despite centuries of, several centuries of slavery, I'm talking now about the African American experience in this country, slavery ends, you've got decades of Jim Crow, you've got policies that have created substandard conditions in one inner city in America after another to this day. Despite all of that, for the African American child born in inner city Detroit tomorrow, it just is what it is. It's nobody's fault that that child is likely to have worse life expectations than the white kid born tomorrow in Greenwich, Connecticut.
That's true. You can't, the ease with which people draw connections between one thing and another is just amazing. I mean, it's like I mean, the average of black kid today, I think, is probably better off, certainly materially, than, say, Ben Carson was when he was growing up.
Ben Carson, the famous black surgeon at Johns Hopkins.
Right, right.
Who is immensely accomplished in every way.
Yes.
Right.
I would say that certainly the black kids who are growing up today have a higher material standard of living than I had. The difference was that the schools were good when I came along. They were especially good in New York at that time, hard as that is to believe. But the kids who grew up in that same place where I lived, they will not get that same education. Now that can be blamed on somebody, but it has very little to do with what happened 100 or 200 years ago. And it's true in other countries. I mean, in Nigeria, for example, there's a tribe, the Igbos, who are living in one of the least fertile parts of Nigeria, who were in fact enslaved in centuries past by other tribes and so on. When the British moved in and set up schools, the Igbos went for the schools. By the time Nigeria became independent, the Igbos had climbed above the other groups that had been ahead of them.
And the other groups that they climbed above, they became envious, upset, and angry, right? And they despised the Igbo for advancing themselves, which a lot of people do as an automatic response to these types of circumstances and situations. But another response could simply be just finding out what it is that those other groups are doing for them to be successful and then start doing that. Right? That's another very viable response too, right? Let's keep going.
To begin with. But there are all kinds of cross currents of factors. The particular culture, or the particular geography, you run through the whole list of them.
You cite, in Intellectuals and Race, you cite an observation by the intelligence expert, IQ scientist, James Flynn, that just stopped me cold. After the Second World War, you've got large numbers of American troops remaining in Germany. For that matter, there's still several tens of thousands there today. And both black and white American soldiers had children with German women. And Flynn discovered that those children growing up in Germany showed no IQ differences at all. The black kids and the white kids, the same. Quoting Intellectuals and Race, Professor Flynn concluded that the reason was that the offspring of black soldiers in Germany, and now you're quoting Professor Flynn, grew up in a nation with no black subculture, close quote. Which means what? Which means they experienced exactly the same expectations. Is this
No, the expectations are external. The culture in which they grew up was not the culture in which black kids grew up in America today.
So they had.
There's no gangster rap that was pervasively available in Germany.
So here's what I'm getting. There is something about black subculture in America today that holds African Americans themselves back.
Now the question is, do you think that there's something about black culture that's holding black Americans back? And first, what does he mean by holding them back? That means having goals that are up here, being in a position that's down here, and then having beliefs and a set of behaviors that's keeping them down here. In other words, holding them back, right? Preventing them from going up here, right? And attaining these goals and crossing over to the other side. So at this point, you have two options. You can either do one, keep the culture, stay down here, right? And never achieve those goals. Or two, you can drop the culture, pick up another culture that's more fitting to guide you towards that goal that's up here, right? And these are the only two options that you have. But the beautiful thing about being a human is that the great unknowable within has provided the human with all the necessary power to choose ye this day, right? And so what choice will you make? Let's continue and see what Dr. Thomas Sowell has to say.
Yes. In fact, I went into this in a previous book on which about black rednecks and white liberals, because that same subculture.
Let's talk about two of your books here. Go ahead.
Because that very same subculture held whites in the South back as well. That in the time this mental testing in the First World War turned up, among other things, the fact that whites from various 4 or 5 southern states scored lower on the mental test than blacks from 4 or 5 northern states. And so it really was a question of the subculture that was there, which was a handicap to both.
All right. And so whose job is it to say, wrong subculture, folks, you're harming yourselves?
Well, I would think in an ideal world that intellectuals might take on that task, but the world that we live in, I've noticed, is not ideal.
And many of the black intellectuals aren't going to do that because they make way too much money counting on the blacks continuing to believe the way they believe and having the culture that they have. Now, let's continue from here and take a look at some of the comments so we can get an idea of what other people have to say on this topic. So let's go right here. The first one here, it says South Koreans were dirt poor 50 years ago. But we had a conservative president that stopped the victimhood and begging from the West. Okay. The next one here says they are professional victims. You know who I am referring to. Now, who is this person referring to? He didn't say any particular group, but who is this person referring to if everyone's pointing the finger? You have to think about this stuff. The next person says this. Their leaders want them to be victims. Then the leaders can make lots of money, and they do. As soon as they stop being victims, their leaders are out of a very lucrative job. A lot of people get paid off of the plight and off of the victimhood of that group, right? It's a lucrative business. It sells, and people will capitalize off of it. Doesn't matter if they look the same as you. People have those instincts in them. The next one says this. The negative influence of black subculture is so obvious, I'm astounded that the interviewer is so surprised at Sowell's statement. The next one says this. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. It doesn't matter what you look like. Whether you grow up in the hood or the trailer park, if the subculture of pervasive generational poverty is your first and primary influence, you are more likely to develop a sort of victim mentality to explain away your failures. Also, when getting locked up is perceived as a rite of passage for young men rather than as a cultural taboo, that subculture is the key to the proverbial school to prison pipeline. And as I said before, it doesn't matter what you look like. And this is true here because you can get people in any type of culture. Dr. Thomas Sowell talks about it, how the white rednecks had this particular type of culture and it gave them similar results, right? So anyone could get caught in there. And you also have other people from different skin complexions who go into black culture and they have those similar type of results, right? So it is a culture that anybody can take on. Anybody, right? And anyone could leave. Let's continue going. When a kid buys into the ghetto youth subculture, it's the beginning of the end. Race and poverty don't matter. Look at rich white Dex Lauper who acts like a gangster rapper and is in trouble with the law. Now, this is the part that anyone can get in here. Anyone. You take on that culture, you can get in there too, right? But as a veteran teacher, once a kid buys into those values, they pretty much stop doing schoolwork and following rules. The schools fail because nobody can get them to study. Show up on time, put the phone down. It's more common with some ethnicities for sure. But a black kid who doesn't get into the youth culture is usually fine. And this is true. You can take some of those children who grow up in different environments and they don't come out sagging the pants, rapping and doing all these types of things from that influence. They should drop the black name though. This is what we're going into now. We're going in building other cultures, right? So you can get totally away from the black identity because it sucks people back in there even when you do come from middle class environments, right? It's always that strong chance where you get pulled back in there. The next one says this. My uncle spent his entire career as a teacher in a top school in Tanzania. In his later years, he was a teacher in a top school here in India. He used to say there is absolutely no difference in ability between the African and Indian students because both sets were from privileged households. So it really comes down to culture and opportunities the parents provide their children. Right? I agree on this. Let's keep going. If you stand around looking for others to fix your problems, you'll waste away your life and opportunities. And this is a one thing that you do not want to happen is grow old and have regrets, right? Especially in today's time. I can understand the people earlier back in the 1800s and all that, in the early 1900s, when it was really, really the whole system working against them, even though there were still successful people during that time who called themselves black people and Negroes. But today, this era, right, it's a completely different time. And if you grow old and you continuously blame your problems on other people and always wait for other solutions coming from other people to fix them, then you may torment yourself as you grow older, right? And you have all these regrets when you're on the latter ends of life, right? When you were younger, you could have made some differences. You could have done it, right? If you put the effort into it. Let's continue going. Unfortunately, a lot of black kids today actually believe they are inferior. Look at that word right there. Believe they are inferior, right? It's a mindset that they have taken on and believed and internalized. It starts within the home. My parents created an environment where high academic achievement could occur by keeping us healthy through good food and exercise, enrolling us in summer reading programs, and my mother subscribing to Ebony, Black Enterprise, Essence, and Jet to let us read about high-achieving African Americans. My mother entertained us with the stories about the great American families and their careers their children pursued, which we later pursued ourselves: business, law, technology, teaching, etc. The first black student recognized in our school district by the National Merit Scholarship Program came from my family. Now look at his background, right? He's come from a different culture though. It didn't matter what his skin color was, right? He comes from a different environment with a different set of expectations, right? And those things influence how the children grow up to perform and grow up to see themselves, right? So if you're someone who's coming from black culture and it's not working for you, then choose ye this day, right? This is the same thing that we had to do. We had to make a choice, which led us to leaving that community completely and creating our own Earpoise ethnic identity and culture, which is optimized to develop character and community, right? And we're looking to help a lot of other people who resonate with the message, right? And who want to do something else and go towards another direction than where that's taking them, right? And so I want to thank you for watching all the way into the end. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.